The Star Wars prequels have been a hot topic of discussion for nearly a quarter of a century at this point, and perhaps no character has been memed and made fun of quite as much as Anakin Skywalker.
This is where the fun begins.
But what I once saw as a comedy, I now see as a tragedy. Anakin is perhaps the most misinterpreted character ever. I think there is a lot of cultural baggage due to him also being Darth Vader, who is a pop culture icon, and I've heard some astonishingly wrong takes on these films, and the character himself, such as T.J. Kirk saying that Anakin killed people just because he had a bad dream.
And like his transition to evil is pretty much like, I had a bad dream and, now I'm against the Jedi because this guy said he could do whatever I want.
This take is so awful, it's like one of those memes on Facebook asking people to deliberately describe a film in the worst way possible. Armored Skeptic, for some reason, has the take that George Lucas was trying to recapture the Han Solo and Leia romance with Anakin and Padme, and simply failed spectacularly.
And I think what Lucas was trying to do was recreate the Han Solo Leia thing, where Leia was saying no, 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 and then Han Solo swooned her anyways. I think he thought that he was kind of making a romance like that, where he was this fucking badass.
Amazing. Every word of what you just said was wrong.
When in reality, Lucas was not making the attempt whatsoever. He was doing something completely different.
It's like if you paint your house white, and somebody comes along, well, that should be a greenhouse. Well, fine, but I wanted to paint it white. I don't think there's anything wrong with painting it white. I don't think there's anything wrong with me for painting it white. Maybe it should be a greenhouse. But I didn't want it to be a greenhouse. I wanted it to be a White House.
Mr. Plinkett, in his Revenge of the Sith review, says that George Lucas is a pseudo-intellectual film snob who tried to recreate Citizen Kane, but failed to achieve this.
Now, whether Lucas realized the personal irony or not, I think he tried to make Anakin Skywalker into his own Charles Foster Kane, and maybe what he thought would be his own film masterpiece.
Now, why the comparison to Citizen Kane exactly? Especially when there are many other films that influence Star Wars far greater? I assume it's because Citizen Kane is the only black and white film that Mike Stoklasa has ever watched, since it is mindlessly regarded as the best film of all time by people who probably couldn't give you 3 reasons why this is the case, so he probably felt obligated to watch it.
Now, if you'll permit me, I'd like to compare Revenge of the Sith with what is widely considered to be one of the greatest motion pictures ever made, Citizen Kane. Is that fair? Nope.
In actuality, Revenge of the Sith has very little to do with Citizen Kane, specifically, and Plinkett is projecting a narrative onto George Lucas that doesn't really exist. So I'm going to explain Anakin from a different perspective than you'll hear from the anti-prequel circle jerk crowd. I will explain how it is much more than just a bad dream. How the romance is not trying to emulate the original trilogy, and is not as bad as people think. And finally, I'll draw comparisons to much more apt characters than Citizen Kane. Right off the bat, I must shake you of this Plinkett truth regime way of looking at these films. People project other characters onto Anakin because they have a preconception that he must be this cool, badass character.
He was this fucking badass.
Plinkett associates Vader with being an intimidating villain that he found awesome as a kid, and therefore cannot accept Vader as a child, or a whiny teenager, like Luke.
I want him cleaned up before dinner.
But I was going into Toshi Station to pick up some power converters.
It just isn't fair. Oh, Biggs is right. I'm never gonna get out of here.
How can you do this? This is outrageous. It's unfair.
Likewise, Skeptic draws parallels between Anakin and Han Solo, because in his mind there must be this cool bad boy archetype, and any other approach to romance is lame and must be bad. For some reason, it never even occurs to them that Anakin is simply meant to be a relatable character, much like Luke. Luke himself isn't particularly badass outside of a few rare moments in Return of the Jedi, yet there is this very bizarre expectation that Anakin should be a total badass. I get that this is somewhat a generational thing. Maybe seeing these films as adults versus first seeing them as children changes your perspective, yet I implore you to think outside your box a bit. Anakin's journey is really just a reverse of Luke's, and there is a lot of imagery to suggest this in the prequels. Everyone knows the famous shot of Luke staring out at the twin suns. The symbolism is quite strong here. Not only have I mentioned in the previous installments that the sun represents the potential that man strives towards, but the fact that there are 2 of them.
This is getting out of hand.
Now there are two of them.
Showcases that there are indeed two paths, the light side and the dark side. The duel of the fates is the struggle between these two potentialities. It is important that the song, Duel of the Fates, plays 3 times in the trilogy. In The Phantom Menace, it plays during the duel with Darth Maul. Qui-Gon dies during this confrontation, and thus condemns Anakin down a different path than he intended, since Qui-Gon originally wanted to train Anakin himself. The second time that it plays is when Anakin attempts to search for his mother on Tatooine in Attack of the Clones. This is another moment that Anakin's fate is sealed as he takes a step towards the dark side by massacring the Sand People. Note that just before he does this, there is a scene that mirrors Luke's, where he is standing outside the very same homestead, looking out at the sunset, just like Luke does. Only this scene is composed in such a way that all we can see is Anakin. We are unable to see the sunset, much like Anakin can't see his solar potential. And since he can't see the light, all he can do is embrace the dark. The third and final time we listen to Duel of the Fates is during the final battles of Revenge of the Sith between Yoda and Sidious and Anakin and Obi-Wan, which of course leads to Anakin becoming Vader proper, completely sealing his fate. Even here, there is more sun imagery. The sun shines through in one tiny spot in the Mustafar sky, even though the rest of the atmosphere is shrouded in ash and smoke, showing that there is still good in him, even if he has become almost entirely engulfed by darkness. For one final sun imagery example, there are the shots of Padme and Anakin staring out at the sunset on Coruscant, which is as beautiful as the famous Luke scene, if not more so.
Episode 3 isn't art, it's commercial diarrhea.
Just get out of here, you stupid, dumb animal!
But let's back up a bit. Why was Anakin unable to reach his potential? And why did he embrace the dark? Anakin grew up outside of the Republic. He was not conditioned into the stoic lifestyle of the Jedi, nor the overly formal political etiquette of Coruscant until he was already 8 years old. Life on Tatooine is much more akin to Mad Max than it is to Blade Runner, like Coruscant is. Anakin grew up in these anarchic conditions that did not enforce regulations on him, so he learned to do things himself. When brought to Coruscant and trained to be a Jedi, he is constantly at odds with Obi-Wan.
We will do exactly as the Council has instructed, and you will learn your place, young one.
As well as the Jedi Council.
How can you be on the Council and not be a master?
He views their codes and rules as arbitrary and as a hindrance to simpler solutions.
Why else do you think we were assigned to her if not to find the killer? Protection is a job for local security, not Jedi.
This clash of perspectives is best demonstrated by Anakin's conversation with Padme on Naboo.
I don't think the system works.
How would you have it work?
Anakin views Padme's perspective as endorsing a bureaucracy that can never get anything done.
We need a system where the politicians sit down and discuss the problem. Agree what's in the best interest of all the people, and then do it.
That's exactly what we do. The trouble is that people don't always agree.
Well, then they should be made to.
Whereas Padme views Anakin's perspective of just do it as rather fascistic and relying on force.
Sounds an awful lot like a dictatorship to me.
Well, if it works.
This bureaucratic lifestyle that encompasses Coruscant, if not the entirety of the Republic, is what is holding back Anakin's potential. Anakin realizes this to some extent, but vents his frustrations towards Obi-Wan as a tangible target since he doesn't fully grasp the situation.
It's all Obi-Wan's fault. He's jealous. He's holding me back.
He then gets nostalgic about his life before leaving Tatooine.
Life seems so much simpler when you're fixing things. I'm good at fixing things. Always was.
Anakin likes a challenge. He is fulfilled by solving problems and helping others. However, the Jedi constantly impose stoicism on him and dissuade him from helping other people.
Put the ship down!
Anakin! Don't let your personal feelings get in the way!
And all the red tape in the Republic prohibits Anakin from actually solving problems. And when Anakin is asked to betray not only Palpatine, but also Padme, as well as accept Padme's inevitable demise, just like his mother's, this is a bridge too far. As Palpatine and Padme were the only ones who seemed to genuinely care about him as a person. Palpatine's motives notwithstanding, I am just referring to Anakin's perspective. So when Anakin has dreams of Padme's death, and the previous dreams he had of someone dying came true, and, on top of this, the Jedi seem to go against his natural inclinations at every turn, yeah, I'm not surprised that he snapped. But oh, I forgot, it was just a bad dream, guys. He just had a nightmare and then killed a bunch of people for no reason. No further nuance required. As for the love story, in addition to this anarchic upbringing, Anakin also grew up with a heroic and romantic worldview. While the Jedi children were conditioned to suppress their emotions, Anakin was free to dream of exploring all the planets.
Has anyone been to them all?
Not likely.
I want to be the first one to see them all.
As well as freeing all the slaves. Now, of course, he was a slave himself, but he even romanticizes that. He does not view himself as a slave.
You're a slave? I'm a person, and my name is Anakin.
Oh, God! Oh, defend that, sir! Defend that garbage!
I could do that.
He even views Padme as an angel.
Are you an angel?
What?
People might write this off as childhood naivete, but I don't think that a Jedi child raised on Coruscant would have reacted to Padme in the same way, so I disagree that this type of thinking is universally inherent to children. In addition, Anakin carries this view into adulthood. We, as an audience in the Western world, find romanticism childish, so naturally, many of us are instilled with the idea that scenes like these are inherently cringy.
No, it's because I'm so in love with you.
So love has blinded you.
But someone from another time and place may be able to take these scenes completely seriously, without scoffing at the "I don't like sand" line.
I don't like sand. It's coarse and rough and irritating.
The irony is that when we laugh at things like this, we are demonstrating that we are of the Coruscant mindset. Anakin's worldview is so alien to us that we can't help but laugh at him. He is an outsider that does not belong, much like many literally me characters. I cannot stress enough that Anakin is not supposed to be like Han Solo at all. In fact, he's quite the opposite. Han is cynical and jaded, much like many of the Gen Xers who idolize him and worship the original trilogy. He is also a literally me character in a sense, but he is so skeptical that he doesn't believe in any idealistic notions whatsoever. He doesn't even believe in the Force, even though it is clearly real in-universe. But since it is something he cannot tangibly test and measure himself from his own experience, he simply dismisses it.
You don't believe in the Force, do you?
Kid, I've flown from one side of this galaxy to the other. I've seen a lot of strange stuff, but I've never seen anything to make me believe there's one all-powerful force controlling everything.
Now Anakin is on the other side of the spectrum. He is very willing to believe in things. This is why he is taken in by Palpatine's story.
Did you ever hear the tragedy of Darth Plagueis the Wise?
If Palpatine had told Obi-Wan this story, he'd be looking for a source to fact-check and verify this information.
Impossible. Perhaps the archives are incomplete.
But Anakin is not rational in this way.
You are asking me to be rational. That is something I know I cannot do.
Anakin is much more like John the Savage from Brave New World. He grew up listening to stories from pilots that would pass through Tatooine.
I listen to all the traders and star pilots who come through here. I'm a pilot, you know, and someday I'm gonna fly away from this place.
This instilled in Anakin an idealism to travel the stars and become a hero, much like how John the Savage romanticized life from his readings of Shakespeare and his time spent with the Native American tribe. Both Anakin and John the Savage grew up in a primitive place and later on were thrust into a soulless, high-tech environment. In both cases, the culture shock was too much for them. I'll link another video where I covered the surprising amount of similarities between Anakin Skywalker and John the Savage, but as far as Anakin himself goes, he is a fish out of water on Coruscant, and I think most filmgoers don't pick up on this. Critics of the prequels often point out how cold and inhuman the Jedi are, and Plinkett himself even rightfully calls out the Jedi for being a religious cult that is indoctrinating children. But these critics are so hell-bent on hating George Lucas and discrediting him at every turn that they never even consider that this was possibly all intentional, and that Anakin himself has the same opinions of the Jedi that the critics do. This is ultimately why Anakin betrays the Jedi. There is an old African proverb that a child who is not welcomed by the village will burn it down to feel its warmth. This describes Anakin to a T. Anakin has been told his whole life that emotions are a path to the dark side, and that the Sith are the ultimate evil. Just before Anakin kills Dooku, Palpatine tells him that he's too dangerous to be left alive.
He was too dangerous to be kept alive.
And later on, this moment is mirrored when Mace Windu is about to kill Palpatine.
He's too dangerous to be left alive.
At this moment, Anakin realizes that the Jedi and Sith are exactly the same, and that all of his conditioning was a bunch of lies.
The Sith and the Jedi are similar in almost every way.
This is something that he's suspected for a while, but couldn't admit it, which is why he gets defensive when Padme points it out to him. She is articulating his worst fears.
Have you ever considered that we may be on the wrong side? What if the democracy we thought we were serving no longer exists, and the Republic has become the very evil we've been fighting to destroy?
I don't believe that. And you're sounding like a separatist.
Both Anakin and Padme are the only ones who can see through the lies of the Jedi, so to speak.
I see through the lies of the Jedi.
Since Anakin was a slave from Tatooine, and Padme was royalty from Naboo, they both understand that the Republic's rules are ultimately arbitrary and extremely ineffective, whereas someone like Obi-Wan was an ardent defender of the system to the very end.
Anakin, my allegiance is to the Republic, to democracy!
Being a fish-out-of-water character means you can understand both what water and air are, and the difference between the two. The fish who has never left the water understands neither. Ironically, Plinkett himself suggests that the Phantom Menace needed a fish-out-of-water character, even though it is very clear that the prequels have two of these characters. Padme is clearly disillusioned with the Republic's inability to help Naboo, and Anakin is constantly frustrated with the Jedi Council's arbitrary rulings. They both disdain the lifestyle of Coruscant and are drawn to each other much like Winston and Julia from 1984, and much like them, they fear being found out, as romantic love and attachment are discouraged and frowned upon by the Jedi, if not by Coruscant in general.
I'm tired of all this deception. I don't care if they know we're married.
Anakin, don't say things like that.
In fact, the advice that Yoda gives to Anakin is possibly the worst thing he could have possibly said to him. But the tragedy of many of these literally me characters is that they invest everything into one person or one idea, and when that falls through, they have nothing left to live for. At risk of sounding like an edgelord, I don't think that Anakin's tragedy is all that dissimilar to the story of many school shooters. People mock the whole younglings thing, but perhaps we laugh at it because otherwise it'd be too real for us. Anakin's tale is one of someone who realizes he's been lied to his whole life, and told to accept that his needs and desires are to be suppressed, and his future goals discarded, asked to betray the only people who ever cared about him, and to squander his potential, despite the fact that he's been told from childhood that he's the chosen one, and trained his whole life for something greater. Gee, doesn't that sound a little familiar? Especially when factoring in that he's seen life elsewhere and knows that other ways of life are possible. This is a recipe for a conflicted and unstable individual, to say the least. I think that if my series has had one consistent theme so far, it is the irrationality of man. Whether that be Driver playing a white knight, Xavier, well, being Xavier, or even with Patrick Bateman. Bateman, as materialistic as he is still driven towards the elusive Dorzia, and is still emulating what he thinks is the ideal man, much like a child pretending to get drunk off of apple juice.
Now come on. I'm being serious. I'm gonna be serious here for a second. Are you gonna listen to me?
The point is that man is inherently idealistic. This cannot be conditioned out of him. Even with Jedi teachings of stoicism and rational thinking, they could not undo Anakin's innate nature. Attempting to make Anakin into this detached monk is like putting a square peg in a round hole. I know this seems rather essentialist, considering that I argue for existentialism in other videos, but I don't necessarily believe that they are mutually exclusive. Man, especially modern man, is essentially existential. This Faustian nature comes out in Anakin as he makes a deal with the devil named Palpatine and attempts to play God to change his fate, ironically losing his soul in doing so. The ultimate irony, though, is that Vader himself was much more cold, stoic, rational, and pragmatic than Anakin ever was. After his abysmal failure, he resigned his idealism completely until Luke brought it back out of him again, since it never truly left him. The lesson of the prequels, then, is that this idealism should not be suppressed. The failure of Anakin's is not only his own, but also the Jedi's. Obi-Wan himself even recognizes this and confesses his role in Anakin's failure.
I have failed you, Anakin. I have failed you.
The childish idealism of men needs its place. Much of the bravery of heroes and the discoveries of geniuses would never have occurred had men merely been practical and pragmatic. Anakin teaches us not to suppress this idealism, lest we overindulge upon its return.
And together you and I can rule the galaxy. Make things the way we want them to be.
or become more machine than man. Perhaps many hate Anakin because he reminds them that within every badass man that they idolize lies a cringy, annoying child, and by extension this reflects on how they are all man-children themselves. And no, I'm not attacking them specifically, I'm making the bold claim that all men are man-children, every single one of them. And not just the men, but the women, and the children too. Our acculturation continues, and all I can say is, now this is pod racing.
Yep. All my life.